If I told you I once won $12 million, but still sat alone crying in my one-bedroom apartment, would you believe me? That's the first thought that races through my head every time I think about how it all started. People dream about winning the lottery like it's a golden ticket to happiness. They picture mansions, expensive cars, dream vacations. But me? The moment those numbers lit up my screen, I felt my heart slam against my chest and my hands start to shake. Not from excitement, but from fear. Fear of what would happen if people found out. Fear of how quickly love can change when money enters the room. Fear of my own family. My name is Alyssa Monroe, and before this story is done, you'll understand why I couldn't trust the very people who raised me, shared dinners with me, hugged me on birthdays, and told me family is everything. But let me start with the moment that planted the seed of doubt deep inside me. It was a week after I found out I'd won. My head was still spinning. $12 million. I'd never even had more than $2,000 in my bank account at one time, and suddenly I had more money than I could ever spend in a lifetime. But I didn't tell anyone, not yet. I needed to know something first. I needed to know if my family loved me for me, or if I was just another burden, another screw-up in their eyes. So I came up with a test. Just $500, that's what I told myself. I'd ask each of them for help. Nothing crazy, nothing out of reach. $500 to cover rent, $500 to keep my lights on. It wasn't about the money. It was about whether they'd stand by me when I had nothing. The first person I went to was my mom, Janet Monroe. She's the type of woman who believes struggle builds character, except she never seemed to struggle much herself. Growing up, she always had sharp words for me when I failed, and silence when I succeeded. That day, I sat at her kitchen table while she poured herself black coffee, the kind she always said kept her sharp. "Mom," I started softly, "I hate to even ask, but I'm short on rent this month. Could you maybe help me out with $500? She didn't even look at me. She set the spoon down, stirred her coffee twice, then said flatly, $500? Alyssa, you're almost 30. You really need to learn how to manage your money. You can't expect me to bail you out every time you mess up." Her words sliced through me. I wanted to scream that I wasn't messing up. I was testing her love. But instead, I just nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Next was my father, Robert Monroe, a retired construction foreman with hands like stone. He was never one to say much. When I asked him the same thing, he shifted in his recliner, remote in hand, eyes locked on the TV. $500? He repeated. "You know I can't get into that. Talk to your mother." That was it. No concern, no questions, just a brush off, like I was asking for spare change. Then came my brother, Ethan. He was 2 years older, always the golden child. He had his own apartment, his own car, his friends who treated him like he was the life of the party. I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd be different. When I asked, he laughed in my face. You're broke again? Pathetic, Alyssa. Seriously, get a job that actually pays. $500. I don't have time for your pity party. The sting of his words burned long after I left his place. My last hope before everything unraveled was my younger sister, Chloe. 25, stylish, always on Instagram posting about the grind of her influencer dreams. I thought a sister's bond would mean something. She sighed dramatically when I asked her, "Alyssa, I'd love to help, but I'm saving up for a new car. Plus, $500 is a lot. You really should budget better. Maybe cut back on whatever it is you're wasting money on." Her words echoed in my head. Wasting money, if only she knew. By the end of that week, I was shattered. Every no wasn't about the money. It was about what it revealed. My mother's judgment, my father's indifference, my brother's cruelty, my sister's selfishness. But there was one person left, the only one I hadn't asked yet. My grandfather, Henry Monroe. 76 years old, a veteran, a man who'd lived through things none of us could imagine. When I finally asked him, I was shaking, bracing for another rejection. Instead, he didn't hesitate. He reached into his wallet, pulled out $500, and pressed it into my hand. "You don't owe me an explanation, Alyssa," he said gently. "If you need help, that's enough for me." At that moment, my eyes filled with tears. I realized I wasn't just holding $500. I was holding proof that someone in this family still loved me unconditionally, and I promised myself something right then. When the time came, the world would see exactly who had stood by me and who had turned their back. People see the word lottery and think instant freedom. They imagine beaches, champagne, shopping sprees, and smiling faces. But let me take you back to my life before the winning numbers flashed across my screen, before money twisted every relationship I thought was unbreakable. I was 29 years old, living in a small one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. The paint on the walls peeled in the corners, the carpet carried stains from tenants long before me, and every night I could hear my upstairs neighbor's TV blaring through the ceiling. But it was mine, my safe little corner of the world where I came home after 12-hour shifts. By day, I worked as a cashier at a grocery store. By night, I cleaned offices downtown. It wasn't glamorous, and it barely covered the bills, but it kept food on the table for me and my little girl, Lila. Yes, I should have mentioned her earlier. My daughter, 6 years old, with a smile brighter than anything I'd ever known. Lila was my reason for waking up every morning, for grinding through exhaustion, for fighting the constant feeling that life had already beaten me. I didn't mind struggling for myself, but struggling for her, that broke me. Watching her wear secondhand clothes, wishing I could afford dance lessons when she begged for them, praying she wouldn't notice the fear in my voice when I answered the landlord's calls about late rent. Every night, after tucking Lila into bed, I'd sit by the window, stare out at the flickering streetlight, and whisper to myself, one day things will get better. One day she'll have everything she deserves. My family, well, that's complicated. Growing up, the Monroes looked like the perfect American family from the outside. We had a neat little house with a trimmed lawn. Sunday dinners were sacred, birthdays were always celebrated. But underneath, love had conditions. Approval had strings attached. My mother, Janet, was the kind of woman who valued appearances more than feelings. She'd smile for neighbors and bake pies for church events, but at home her words were sharp. Don't embarrass us, Alyssa. Don't be lazy. If you can't do it right, don't do it at all. When I dropped out of college because I couldn't afford tuition and was drowning in anxiety, she didn't ask if I was okay. She just said, I'm disappointed in you. Those words stuck to me like glue. My father, Robert, was quieter, but no warmer. He believed emotions were weakness. If I cried, he'd tell me to toughen up. If I failed, he'd say, that's life. Get used to it. He never hit me. He didn't have to. His silence was enough to make me feel invisible. Then there was my brother, Ethan, 2 years older, always praised, always excused. If he got in trouble, my parents called it boys being boys. If I slipped up, it was the end of the world. Ethan grew into the kind of man who thought the world owed him something. Flashy clothes, expensive sneakers, debt piled high but hidden behind confidence. He mocked me constantly. To him, I was the family joke. And Chloe, my younger sister, she was the baby, the one Mom and Dad spoiled. Pretty, charming, always chasing the newest trend. She didn't mean to be cruel, but she lived in a world where appearances mattered more than relationships. When she looked at me, I could see pity in her eyes, like I was a cautionary tale, the older sister who could have been something, but never made it. The only one who ever truly made me feel safe was my grandfather, Henry. He was a man of few words, but the ones he spoke carried weight. He'd fought in wars, built his own house, buried the love of his life, and yet he still managed to smile like he knew something the rest of us didn't. He never judged me, never compared me. When I visited, he'd just pat the seat next to him and ask how I was holding up, and he meant it. So when I won the lottery, my first instinct wasn't to scream with joy or call my family. It was to hold my daughter tighter and cry quietly into her hair, terrified of what would happen if anyone else knew. I wanted to believe that money wouldn't change us, that family would still mean family. But deep down, I remembered every look of disappointment, every mocking laugh, every time I'd been told I wasn't enough. I needed to know the truth before I let that secret out. I needed to test them, to see if any of them would stand by me when I was still the failure, before I became the millionaire. And in my heart, I prayed that I was wrong. I prayed that when the moment came, they'd prove me wrong. Because more than money, more than freedom, I wanted love. I wanted proof that I wasn't as alone as I felt. People say you never really know who someone is until you ask them for help. I thought I knew my family. I thought I knew how they'd respond. But the truth hit me harder than I ever imagined. It started with my mom, Janet. I sat in her tidy kitchen, the one that always smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. She was stirring her coffee, sharp as always, her back straight like she was preparing for battle. "Mom," I said carefully, I hate to even bring this up, but I'm short on rent. Could you help me out with $500 just until next month?" She froze mid-stir, then set her spoon down with a clink. Finally, she turned and looked at me, not with worry, not with love, but with disappointment carved deep into her face. "500? Alyssa, you're nearly 30. What are you doing with your life if you can't handle your own bills? You need to stop making stupid decisions. I'm not going to keep rescuing you." The word rescuing sliced through me. She said it like I was a burden she'd carried all her life, like love was a chore she regretted. I tried to explain, my voice trembling. "It's not forever, Mom. She cut me off. "No, Alyssa, figure it out." And that was it. My own mother, the woman who once rocked me to sleep when I was sick, couldn't spare $500. Next, I turned to my father, Robert. He was in his recliner, TV remote in hand, the hum of the news filling the room. "Dad," I said softly, "I really need help this month. Could you lend me $500? He didn't even look at me. His eyes stayed glued to the TV. "500, huh?" He sighed, shifting slightly. "You know I can't get into that. Talk to your mother." I felt my chest tighten. I already did. She said no. He just grunted. "Then I guess you'll figure something out." No concern, no hug, not even a question about how I was holding up, just dismissal, like I was background noise. I thought maybe my brother would be different. Ethan had always been the confident one, the golden child, the one who never heard the word no. When I showed up at his apartment and asked, he actually laughed, a full mocking laugh that echoed in my ears. "You, asking me for money. Pathetic, Alyssa, seriously. I can't believe you'd come here begging. You need to grow up and stop waiting for handouts. $500? You act like that's nothing, but it's not my job to babysit you." I felt my face burn, shame mixing with anger. "I'm not begging. I just thought—" He cut me off with a smirk. "You thought wrong." And then he walked away, leaving me standing in his living room like I was some stranger who'd wandered in off the street. By then, my heart was already breaking. But I had one last hope. My sister, Chloe. We'd shared bunk beds growing up, whispered secrets into the night. I thought maybe she'd remember that bond. When I asked her, she sighed like I'd just ruined her day. "Alyssa, I'd love to help, really, but I'm saving for a new car right now, and $500 is a lot. Maybe you should try budgeting better. Cut back on whatever you're wasting money on." Her words stung worse than my brother's. At least he didn't pretend to care. Chloe looked at me with pity, like I was broken, like she was too above it all to bend down and help. I left her apartment with my chest heavy, my throat burning. Each rejection wasn't about the money, it was about what it revealed. My mother saw me as a failure, my father saw me as a nuisance, my brother saw me as a joke, my sister saw me as pathetic. But there was one person left, the only one I could still hope for, my grandfather, Henry Monroe. I drove to his small, weathered house at the edge of town. The porch creaked as I stepped onto it, the wind carrying the faint smell of cut grass. When he opened the door, his face lit up the way it always did when he saw me. "Alyssa," he said warmly, pulling me into a hug. "What brings you by?" I hesitated, my voice trembling as I asked, "Grandpa, I hate to even ask this, but I need help. Could you lend me $500? He didn't pause. He didn't question me. He just reached into his wallet, pulled out the bills, and placed them gently in my hand. "You don't owe me an explanation," he said, his eyes kind. "If you need help, that's enough for me." Tears filled my eyes as I hugged him tightly. In that moment, I realized it wasn't about the money. It was about love. And in a family full of rejection, my grandfather was the only one who truly had mine. I walked away that night with $500 in my pocket, but more importantly, with clarity in my heart. I now knew who stood by me. I knew who I could trust, and I promised myself, when the time came, everyone would see exactly who had been there for me and who had turned their backs. The night I left my grandfather's house with that $500 in my pocket, something inside me shifted. It wasn't just relief, and it wasn't just gratitude. It was clarity. I had tested every single member of my family, my mother, father, brother, sister. All of them had turned me away when I asked for something as simple as $500. They had laughed, judged, dismissed, or scolded me. And yet my grandfather, with his weathered hands and warm smile, hadn't hesitated for a second. In that moment, I realized something powerful. Money doesn't change people. It only reveals who they truly are, and I knew exactly who my family was. For days, I carried that thought with me everywhere. At work, while I scanned groceries under the fluorescent lights, I thought about it. On my second job, scrubbing down empty office cubicles at night, I thought about it. Even while tucking Lila into bed, watching her little chest rise and fall, I thought about it. I had $12 million. $12 million. And not one of them knew. Not the ones who had mocked me, not the ones who had shut the door in my face. I had something stronger than money. I had the truth. At first, I felt bitter, angry. I wanted to scream at them. I wanted to wave the winning ticket in their faces and say, "You didn't believe in me when I had nothing, so don't come running now that I have everything." But then I remembered my grandfather's words, "You don't owe me an explanation." That was when my anger cooled and my resolve hardened. I didn't need revenge. What I needed was patience, because if there was one thing I knew for sure, it was this. Eventually, they would come back. I decided I wouldn't spend recklessly. I wouldn't flaunt the money. Instead, I'd live quietly, strategically, and plan for the day when the masks would come off. First, I got my financial house in order. I met with an advisor in secret, made investments, and set up accounts for my daughter's future. Lila would never know the kind of struggle I had lived through. She would have opportunities, security, and the freedom to dream without fear of rent notices or empty refrigerators. Then, without telling anyone, I began to take care of my grandfather. His house, though sturdy, was showing its age. I arranged for repairs, a new roof, fresh paint, stronger insulation. All paid for anonymously. His old pickup, the one that rattled like it might fall apart at any second, was replaced with a reliable car. I even made sure his medical bills disappeared from his mailbox, quietly covered before they could become a burden. Whenever he asked how these things happened, I just smiled and said, "Maybe you've got a guardian angel, Grandpa." He'd chuckle, shake his head, and never press further. That was the kind of man he was. Grateful, but never greedy. Meanwhile, with the rest of my family, I kept my distance. I didn't cut them off completely. That would have raised suspicion. I answered their calls with polite small talk, joined for the occasional holiday meal, and pretended everything was normal. But inside, I was building a wall. Every time my mom criticized me, every time my dad ignored me, every time Ethan bragged or Chloe showed off, I simply smiled, nodded, and remembered their answers when I had asked for help. It wasn't about holding a grudge. It was about remembering the truth. Months passed, and slowly I began to notice subtle changes. My family whispered about rumors, little signs that maybe my luck had turned. Maybe they noticed I wasn't working double shifts anymore. Maybe they saw how Lila had a new backpack for school, or how I seemed calmer, lighter, no longer crushed by the weight of constant survival. I didn't confirm or deny anything. I just let the whispers spread, because I knew exactly what would happen next. One evening, as I sat on my grandfather's porch with him, sipping sweet tea while Lila played in the yard, he looked at me with knowing eyes. "You're different these days," he said quietly. I hesitated. Different how? Stronger, happier, like you finally found your footing. He paused, then added with a small smile, "I don't know what changed, Alyssa, but I'm glad to see it." I squeezed his hand. I guess I just finally realized who I can count on. He didn't ask what I meant. He didn't need to. That was the turning point. I wasn't the desperate woman begging for $500 anymore. I wasn't the invisible daughter, the pathetic sister, or the failure in their eyes. I was someone with power, not because of the 12 million sitting quietly in my accounts, but because I finally knew the truth about loyalty, and I promised myself the day they came knocking, and I knew they would, I'd be ready. I'd open the door with a smile, and I'd let the only person who ever helped me show them exactly what true love looks like. The day finally came. It was late afternoon, the sun dipping low, throwing golden light across my front yard. Lila was coloring at the kitchen table, and my grandfather, Henry, was sitting on the porch swing, humming softly while sipping tea. It was a peaceful day, until I heard the sound of multiple cars pulling into my driveway. I froze. I knew that sound. The crunch of tires on gravel, the slamming of car doors, the voices, hurried, anxious, overlapping. My chest tightened as I peeked out the window. There they were, my mother, my father, Ethan, Chloe. Even two aunts I hadn't seen in years, all standing in my yard like a small army, their faces painted with forced smiles and nervous energy. They knew. Word had finally reached them. I opened the front door slowly, the creak echoing like a warning. They turned to me, their eyes wide, their expressions a mix of desperation and hope. "Alyssa!" my mother cried, stepping forward first, her arms open like she was about to embrace me. "Sweetheart, we've missed you." Missed me. That was her opening line. Not an apology, not a question about how I'd been, just a rehearsed act. My father spoke next, clearing his throat. We heard you've come into some money. We thought maybe we should sit down as a family and talk." My brother, Ethan, grinned like a salesman. "Yeah, Alyssa, I mean, we might have been hard on you before, but we're family, and family sticks together, right? Right?" Chloe's eyes sparkled with a kind of greedy excitement she couldn't hide. "Imagine all the amazing things we could do together, sis. You, me. We could travel, invest, buy a place. Like old times, just better." I stood there silently, letting their words wash over me. My heart didn't race this time. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't desperate for their approval anymore. I looked at each of them carefully, and all I saw was hunger. Not for love, not for connection, but for money. My money. Behind me, I could hear my grandfather's swing creak as he shifted. His presence gave me strength. Finally, I spoke, my voice calm and steady. "You want help now?" I asked. "All of you?" They nodded quickly, overlapping voices filling the air. "Yes, of course." "Anything you can do would be such a blessing. We're family, Alyssa. Family helps each other." The irony stung, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I smiled faintly. Funny, because not too long ago I asked every single one of you for help, just $500. And do you remember what you said to me? A hush fell over the group. My mother stiffened, her lips pressing together. My father shifted uncomfortably. Ethan looked away and Chloe rolled her eyes like she wished I wouldn't bring it up. I didn't wait for their excuses. I stepped aside, holding the door open wider. "If you want help," I said softly, "ask the only one who ever helped me." They blinked, confused, their faces twisting. And then, slowly, my grandfather Henry stepped out onto the porch, his posture straight despite his age, his eyes calm but firm. He walked up beside me, resting a hand gently on my shoulder. The look on their faces was priceless. Shock, shame, guilt. It rippled through them like a wave. My mother's mouth fell open. "Dad, you?" He nodded once, steady. She asked. I gave, no questions. That's what love is. My father's face paled. Ethan muttered under his breath, "This is ridiculous." Chloe crossed her arms, glaring at me like she'd been tricked. But none of them could escape the truth hanging in the air. When I had nothing, they gave me nothing. When I asked for so little, they laughed. And the only one who gave without hesitation was the man standing proudly by my side. For the first time in years, I felt taller, stronger, untouchable. I smiled at them, not cruelly, but with finality. "You didn't believe in me when I had nothing. Don't expect me to believe in you now that I have everything." Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. One by one, their shoulders slumped. Their fake smiles faded. They turned, muttering excuses, avoiding eye contact as they trudged back to their cars. The sound of engines starting filled the air, and within minutes the yard was empty again, except for me, my daughter, and my grandfather. Henry squeezed my shoulder, his voice gentle. "You did the right thing." I looked up at him, tears brimming in my eyes, not from sadness but from release. "No," I whispered, "you did." When the last car pulled away from my driveway, a silence settled over the yard. It wasn't the heavy silence of shame anymore. It was peace. For the first time in years, I felt free. I looked over at my grandfather, Henry, still standing tall despite his age, his hand warm on my shoulder. Beside him, little Lila ran into my arms, unaware of the storm that had just blown through our lives. She giggled, clutching her coloring book, and in that moment I realized something. I already had everything I needed. The $12 million didn't matter nearly as much as the truth I'd uncovered. Over the weeks that followed, my family tried to reach out again. My phone buzzed with messages I didn't answer. "Alyssa, we just want to talk. Don't shut us out. We're family. Can't we just move past this? Move past this." As if betrayal could be brushed aside with a few words. As if my memory wasn't strong enough to recall every cutting remark, every laugh in my face, every cold shoulder when I needed warmth most. No, I didn't move past it. I moved forward, and there's a difference. I poured myself into creating a new life. I bought a modest but comfortable home where Lila could have her own room, filled with toys and books she once only dreamed of. I secured her education, set up savings she won't even touch until she's grown. I wanted her to grow up never knowing the gnawing fear of eviction notices or the humiliation of empty cupboards. And I kept taking care of my grandfather, not because he expected it, he never would, but because I wanted to honor the love he had shown me when everyone else turned away. I fixed his house from the ground up, made sure he had the best doctors, and spent as much time as I could by his side. We'd sit on that porch together, watching the sun dip below the trees, and he'd tell me stories of his youth, about war, sacrifice, and what loyalty truly means. He never asked about the money. He never wanted to know details. All he ever said was, "I'm just glad to see you happy." And I was. For the first time in my life, I truly was. But happiness didn't come from the 12 million. It came from clarity. Here's what I learned. Money doesn't destroy relationships. It exposes them. It pulls back the curtain and shows you who's clapping for you and who's waiting for you to fall. When I had nothing, most of my family showed me exactly how much I was worth to them. Nothing. But when they thought I had everything, suddenly I was valuable again. The truth is, their love was conditional. My grandfather's love was not. And that made all the difference. One night, after putting Lila to bed, I sat by the window with a cup of tea and thought about everything. I thought about the moment I scratched that lottery ticket, the way my hands shook as the numbers matched, the fear that bloomed in my chest. If I could go back, I realized, I wouldn't change a thing, not even the betrayals. Because without them, I might have spent years blindly giving pieces of myself to people who never truly cared. Now, I knew better. I knew who I could trust. I knew who deserved my loyalty. And I knew that family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by love. My mother, father, brother, and sister eventually stopped trying. The calls grew less frequent, the texts slowed, until finally, silence. It hurt in a way. A part of me still wished they had chosen differently, that they had chosen me, but their absence also gave me space to heal. I filled that space with Lila's laughter, my grandfather's wisdom, and the quiet joy of building a life on my own terms. If you're watching this, maybe you've been through something similar. Maybe you've asked for help and been turned away. Maybe you've discovered the painful truth about people you thought you could depend on. If so, let me leave you with this. Don't let their rejection define your worth. The people who truly love you will show it. Not when it's convenient, not when you have something to offer them, but when you have nothing at all. That's real love, that's real family. And if you're lucky, like I was, you'll find at least one person who proves that to you. Hold on to them, cherish them. Because in a world full of people chasing money, power, and appearances, unconditional love is the rarest treasure of all. As for me, I smile every time I remember the look on their faces when my grandfather stepped out onto that porch. They weren't prepared. Not for him, not for me, and not for the truth. And that truth is simple. I don't need their approval. I don't need their money. I don't need their version of love. Because I already won. Not the $12 million, but the lesson that changed everything. And that's my story. Winning the lottery didn't just change my bank account. It revealed the truth about love, loyalty, and family. In the end, money didn't show me who I could buy. It showed me who I could trust. If this story touched you, if it made you think about your own relationships, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Tell me if you've ever discovered who really has your back when times got tough. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. It really helps more people find stories like this one. Share it with a friend who might need a reminder about what true love looks like. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories that just might change the way you see the world. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. And I'll see you in the next one.